On a cold Thursday morning in November 1978, in Crawford County, Iowa, 71-year-old Samuel Harlan stood beside the fence line of his farm and watched a black Buick stop beside his mailbox. The man who stepped out carried a leather briefcase, polished shoes, and the confidence of somebody who believed a signature could move a family off land they had worked for generations. His name was Richard Cole, 39 years old, vice president of a local bank, and the man who had spent 6 months arranging to foreclose on Harlan's 80-acre farm. Cole had come to deliver the final notice. Samuel looked at the papers. Then he looked at the young banker. "You should come inside," the old farmer said quietly. "There's something you need to see." Cole followed him through the yard, past the weathered machine shed, toward a red tractor hidden beneath a canvas tarp. Samuel pulled the tarp away. Underneath sat a 1952 Farmall M, faded red paint dulled by 46 years of Iowa weather, rust blooming around the wheel wells, 6-cylinder engine waiting beneath a hood scarred by work. It was not beautiful. It was not valuable by auction house standards. But Samuel placed one hand on its hood as though touching an old friend. Cole looked at the tractor, then at Samuel. "The bank isn't buying scrap iron," he said. Samuel did not answer. Let me tell you about Samuel Harlan. He had farmed the same patch of Crawford County since 1941, when he was 34 and the country was still fighting its way through the Depression. His father had bought the original 80 acres in 1930 for $4,800, paying every installment through years when corn prices collapsed and neighbors disappeared from the land. Samuel learned early that farming was not about owning expensive things. It was about knowing which things could be trusted. His hands told the story better than any photograph. The knuckles were enlarged. Fingernails carried permanent traces of soil. His left thumb had a white scar from a broken cultivator spring in 1956. His boots were muddy even on dry mornings because he walked the fields before breakfast. He rarely spoke unless there was something worth saying. His wife, Ruth, had died in 1974. Their only son, Daniel, had moved to Minnesota after college, leaving Samuel alone with the farm, the house, and the machinery his family had accumulated over nearly half a century. The Farmall M was the heart of it. Samuel's father bought that tractor in March 1952 from a dealer in Denison, paying $2,750. The M made roughly 38 drawbar horsepower and weighed more than 4,500 pounds before attachments. It pulled plows, cultivators, wagons, and later a small hay baler. Samuel had driven it as a young man. Ruth had driven it during harvest. Daniel had learned on its seat with his father's hand resting on the steering wheel beside him. By 1978, nobody considered a Farmall M impressive. That was precisely why Cole thought Samuel was finished. The bank wanted the land because an expanding feed company had quietly purchased neighboring parcels. Samuel's mortgage was small by modern standards, but a failed corn crop in 1977 and medical bills after Ruth's illness had pushed him behind. The remaining balance was $8,640. Cole had offered him 30 days. Samuel had asked for 60. Cole had refused. "You know what this land is worth now," the banker said. Samuel nodded. "I know. You could sell voluntarily and walk away with something." Samuel looked toward the fields. "I'm not walking away." Cole sighed. Then Samuel said the sentence that would bother him for years. "You came to take my farm. But tomorrow, I may have to save your life." Cole laughed once, assuming it was an old man's strange attempt at humor. Samuel did not smile. "Have you ever known you were right when everyone around you thought you were simply too stubborn to understand the times?" Samuel had that look in his eyes that morning. Not anger. Not fear. Something quieter. Cole gathered his papers and walked back toward the Buick. By sunset, the temperature had fallen below freezing. By midnight, Richard Cole's car was lying upside down in a drainage ditch 3 miles from Samuel's farm. And Samuel was already walking toward the shed. The road between Cole's house and the bank crossed a low section of Crawford County where winter runoff collected beneath a narrow bridge. At 12:17 that night, Cole's Buick hit black ice, slid sideways, struck the wooden guardrail, and dropped nose first into the ditch. The windshield shattered. The driver's door jammed. Cole woke hanging against his seat belt. The engine was still running. Smoke filled the cabin. He tried the door. Nothing. He pushed the passenger side. Nothing. Then he saw headlights through the windshield. Samuel Harlan had arrived in the Farmall M. There was no rescue truck, no police cruiser, no ambulance yet. Just an old red tractor crawling down the frozen road, its rear tires leaving dark tracks in the frost. Samuel stopped beside the wreck. He climbed down slowly. Cole could barely speak. "Sam." Samuel looked through the broken glass. "You hurt." "My leg." Samuel walked around the Buick, studied the ditch, then climbed onto the Farmall again. "Let me tell you about that tractor." The Farmall M had no hydraulic loader, no modern recovery system, and no computer-controlled transmission. What it had was mechanical simplicity and torque. Its six-cylinder engine could deliver force steadily at low speed, exactly where a machine needed it when pulling something heavy without spinning the tires. Samuel had kept the original engine almost entirely intact. He changed the oil every 50 hours. He greased every fitting. He replaced worn bearings before they failed. He cleaned the radiator by hand. He had rebuilt the clutch once, in 1968. The tractor did not look strong. It was strong. There is an important difference between horsepower and torque. Horsepower tells you how quickly an engine can do work. Torque tells you how hard it can twist. When an old tractor begins pulling a heavy load from a standstill, torque is what matters first. The engine does not need to race. It needs to turn with enough force to overcome resistance. That is why an old Farmall could seem almost lazy while moving something enormous. It was not lazy. It was working in the range where its mechanical design was strongest. Samuel backed the M toward the ditch. He attached a heavy steel chain from the tractor's drawbar to the Buick's frame. Cole watched through the windshield. "You're going to pull me out?" Samuel tightened the chain. "I said you should come inside this morning." Cole almost laughed again. But he was too cold. Samuel climbed aboard. The Farmall coughed once. Then twice. Then the engine caught. Black smoke drifted above the hood. Samuel eased the clutch. The chain tightened. The Buick moved perhaps 2 inches. Samuel stopped. He repositioned the tractor. Cole felt the car shift. Then the Farmall pulled again. This time the Buick moved nearly a foot. Samuel stopped. He walked back to check the chain. Cole shouted, "Why are you stopping?" Samuel looked up. "Because machines break when men get impatient." That sentence stayed with Cole. Samuel returned to the seat. The Farmall pulled again. The Buick climbed another few inches. Then the right rear tire of the tractor slipped toward the ditch. Samuel released the clutch. He climbed down. Cole watched him inspect the ground. The old farmer found a stack of rough boards in the back of his truck and placed them beneath the rear tires. He worked slowly, methodically. Finally, the tractor pulled. The Buick rose. The front wheels climbed onto the road. Then the rear wheels. Cole was free. But the rescue was not finished. Samuel opened the Buick's passenger door and helped Cole out. The banker's left leg was badly bruised, but not broken. An ambulance arrived 11 minutes later. Before they loaded Cole inside, he looked at Samuel. "Why did you come?" Samuel wiped grease from his hands. "Because you needed help. Nothing more." The next morning, the story spread through town. By Friday afternoon, half a dozen men were gathered outside the Harlan machine shed. Cole was there too, his leg wrapped in a brace. He wanted to thank Samuel. Instead, something happened that changed the entire balance between them. A machinery dealer named Frank Bowers pointed toward the Farmall M and said, "That thing couldn't pull a modern combine out of a parking lot." Cole laughed. Then he laughed harder. Other men joined him. Samuel stood beside the tractor, hands resting on the hood. He waited. The laughter faded. Samuel finally said, "Maybe you're right." Then he opened the shed door. Inside was something none of them had expected. Behind the Farmall sat a heavy steel plow, a restored belt pulley, and an old set of logging chains Samuel had inherited from his father. None of it looked important. But Samuel had been preparing for something. Not a competition. Not revenge. A demonstration. The feed company that wanted Samuel's property had begun clearing land on the other side of the county. Their contractor had brought a modern John Deere 4020 and a large hydraulic scraper. The equipment was faster than Samuel's Farmall and worth several times the value of his entire farm. The contractor believed speed was everything. Samuel believed leverage was. Let me tell you about the afternoon of December 2nd, 1978. The sky was pale and hard. Frost covered the fields. A group of men in 1970s work clothes gathered beside a muddy access road where the contractor's scraper had become buried in frozen ground. The John Deere 4020 had already tried twice. Its tires spun. The scraper did not move. The contractor had called a second truck. Samuel watched from the edge of the field. Cole stood beside him. "You think your Farmall can do it?" Samuel looked at the buried machine. "I think we can find out." The men laughed. This time Cole did not. The banker had begun looking at Samuel differently. Have you ever owned something that everyone else called worthless, only to discover that its value was hidden in the one situation nobody else understood? Samuel drove the Farmall toward the scraper. He did not rush. He positioned the tractor at an angle. He walked the chain around the scraper's frame. He checked every connection twice. Then he climbed onto the seat. The crowd became quiet. The Farmall M idled. Low. Steady. Samuel eased forward. Nothing happened. The engine note deepened. The rear tires compressed into the soil. Still nothing. Samuel stopped. He backed up. Then he changed the angle by several feet. It looked almost insignificant. It wasn't. The chain now pulled closer to the scraper's centerline, reducing the sideways resistance that had been wasting force. Samuel eased the clutch again. The chain snapped tight. The Farmall leaned forward. For 1 second, nothing moved. Then the scraper shifted. An inch. Another inch. The crowd went silent. Samuel kept pulling. The Farmall's rear wheels dug into the frozen earth. The scraper moved another foot. Then 3. Then 6. A cheer rose from the men. Samuel did not react. He kept the tractor moving at walking speed. The buried scraper finally climbed free. The John Deere sat behind it, engine still running. Frank Bowers stared at the Farmall. Cole said nothing. Samuel stopped the tractor. He climbed down. Bowers walked toward him. "That shouldn't have worked." Samuel wiped his hands on a rag. "It worked because we pulled where the ground would let us." That sentence became the story people repeated. But the story had only begun. The feed company's attorney arrived 2 days later. His name was Harold Voss. He brought documents showing the company had acquired options on 3 neighboring farms. If Samuel lost his 80 acres, the company could connect the parcels and create a continuous tract large enough for a commercial livestock operation. The bank had the legal authority to foreclose. But Cole had begun reading the old mortgage file differently. He discovered that a previous bank officer had incorrectly recorded a payment made by Samuel in 1976. The amount was only $1,200, but correcting the error changed the foreclosure calculation. Cole could have ignored it. Nobody would have known. Instead, he drove to Samuel's farm. The old farmer was repairing the Farmall's clutch linkage. Cole stood beside the shed. "I found something." Samuel looked up. "What?" "A payment they didn't credit." Samuel waited. "Your balance is wrong." "How wrong?" $800. Samuel looked at him. Then he smiled. "That is enough to matter." Cole nodded. But there was another problem. The bank board had already scheduled the foreclosure hearing, and the chairman had signed the papers that morning. Cole drove straight back to town. He arrived after the meeting had already started. Inside that room, he would have to choose between protecting his position and protecting the farmer who had saved his life. And for the first time in his career, Richard Cole walked into a room knowing exactly which choice would cost him the most. Cole entered the bank boardroom at 4:08 in the afternoon. 7 men sat around the table. The foreclosure papers were already prepared. The chairman looked up. "You're late." Cole placed the corrected payment ledger on the table. "I made a mistake." Nobody spoke. Then Cole explained the missing $1,200 payment. The chairman frowned. That changes the balance. Yes. It doesn't change the foreclosure. Cole looked at the papers. Then he remembered the ditch. He remembered smoke filling his lungs. He remembered Samuel standing outside the wreck without asking what kind of man deserved rescuing. Cole pushed the foreclosure papers away. It changes more than the balance. The board voted. The foreclosure was postponed. Then postponed again. Finally, after weeks of negotiation, the bank refinanced Samuel's remaining debt under terms he could actually meet. The feed company withdrew its purchase offer. Samuel kept his farm. But that was not the end. Let me tell you about what happened to Richard Cole. 5 years later, in December 1983, Cole was no longer the youngest vice president at the bank. He had become its president. He had also changed the way he evaluated farm loans. He began visiting farms personally. He stopped judging equipment by appearance. He started asking farmers how long they expected their machinery to last. One farmer remembered him saying, "Don't tell me what the machine looks like. Tell me what it has done." That was Samuel's influence. 10 years later, in 1988, Samuel was 81. His hands had become slower. His shoulders had narrowed. But every spring, he still climbed onto the Farmall M. Daniel had returned from Minnesota and brought his wife and 2 children to the farm. The old 80 acres had become a family operation again. The Farmall remained in the shed. The paint had faded even more. The rust had spread. But the engine still started. Sometimes Samuel would let his grandson sit beside him while the tractor pulled a wagon across the field. He never talked much during those rides. He didn't need to. In 1991, Samuel died peacefully in his farmhouse. He was 84. At his funeral, Richard Cole stood near the back. He had not seen Samuel for several months. When it was time to speak, Cole walked to the front. He did not talk about the bank. He did not talk about the foreclosure. He talked about the night in the ditch. He told the congregation that Samuel Harlan had every reason to leave him there. "He had papers in his pocket proving I was trying to take his farm," Cole said. "And I had papers in mine proving I could do it." Cole paused. Still, when I needed him, he came. That was all. After the funeral, Daniel handed Cole a small envelope. Inside was a photograph of the Farmall M. On the back, Samuel had written a single sentence. "Take care of what still has work left in it." Cole kept that photograph for the rest of his life. The Farmall worked for another generation. In 1997, Daniel restored the sheet metal but left the old scars visible. He refused to repaint every imperfection. "Those marks belong here," he told his children. The tractor pulled wagons until 2003. Then it was used mainly for demonstrations and small jobs around the farm. By 2008, the youngest Harlan grandson had learned to drive it. He was the 3rd generation to sit behind the same steering wheel. Richard Cole visited the farm that summer. He was nearly 70. He walked into the shed and placed his hand on the Farmall's hood. "I used to laugh at this thing," he said. Daniel smiled. "Dad knew." Cole looked toward the field. "I know." The old banker had spent 30 years learning the lesson Samuel understood before either man had met. Worth is not always measured by price. Strength is not always loud. And survival is sometimes nothing more complicated than refusing to abandon what has already carried you this far. Let me tell you about the final time that Farmall ran. It was October 2011. Daniel's grandson started the engine at sunrise. The tractor coughed. Smoke rose beneath the shed roof. Then the engine settled into its familiar rhythm. The boy drove slowly into the field. For a moment, nobody spoke. The morning sun touched the red hood. The machine moved through ground that had known Samuel's boots, Ruth's hands, Daniel's childhood, and 3 generations of Harlan footsteps. It was not the fastest tractor. It was not the newest. It was not worth much money. But it was still doing exactly what it had been built to do. And maybe that was the point. Some things don't become obsolete. They simply wait for someone to remember why they were built. If you knew someone who kept an old machine, old tool, old truck, or old piece of equipment running long after everyone else called it worthless, tell me their story in the comments. I read these stories because they remind us that value is often hiding in places nobody bothers to look. And if you want another story like this, the next one is about an Iowa farmer who refused to sell a broken-down tractor because he knew what was buried beneath its seat. That story is waiting for you.